But this is very important in understanding what we mean when we talk about the effects of land and agricultural commercialization. It has to do with the numbers of people who are affected because of these small holdings that they have. And we know that smallholders produce 80% of Ghana's total agricultural output. If you look at the development of agricultural commercialization over time, you see that we have three kinds of commercial agriculture models. There are the estates and plantations, and this is a minority in the Ghanaian agrarian sector. We also have nucleus farms with outgrowers, and sometimes just outgrower models, and they are very popular increasingly. And then we have small and medium-sized commercial farms, which probably have the majority of people involved in them. One of the interesting things about the state of agriculture is the dichotomy between the official document and what a lot of academics also say about agriculture. If you look at our official documents, and the latest is the NDPC document I presented, you see that they identify a number of problems with agriculture. And it's about the low yields and productivity, the post-harvest losses, poor management, low levels of mechanization and technology, fertilizer, the dominance of smallholders, and that's seen as a problem, the dominance of smallholders, overaged farmers, inadequate investment, access to finance, poor infrastructure. And this is not to say these are not problems, but you will notice that when you look at the literature, people are critiquing the policies that have led to some of the things we see now, or have led to their persistence. Because the idea is that if we have all these problems with agriculture, we should be seeking to solve them. So why haven't we solved them? And people have drawn attention to policies which have privileged export commodities and neglected food crops over a long period of time. And although this has been rebalanced a bit in more recent times, we still know that more attention is devoted to export food. We also know that there's been a wholesale liberalization of agriculture, which dismantles state support. And unfortunately, the private sector could not do what it was expected to do, which is to step into the field and take up where the state has left. Thirdly, they also talk about the fact that there's increasing land concentration and scarcity, and that more and more you can see the gender inequalities in land holding. Oh, wow. They also talk about the problematic land and labor relations. And this is a very critical issue, but largely missing from agricultural policy documents. The labor and land relations which are disturbing agriculture. For example, there's a lot of discussion in the academic literature about share contracts and the poor wages of agricultural workers. But we don't hear much of that in our policy documents, which are looking more fixed the technical details. Last but not the least are the neglect of gender issues. Again, this is not to say we do not have WIAD and we still do not have programs which are trying to solve these problems. But if you look at their success rates and so on, we can argue that these remedies are a bit superficial and are not looking at the gender issue. And what are the gender issues? One, we all know agriculture is a gender space. Household production is, and also distribution and consumption takes place within this household. There's a gender division of labor, and there's a gendered control of productive resources and decision making. And there's a lot of segmentation of sectors and activities, and therefore benefits. So if you look at the so-called agricultural value chain, you see that men and women often are placed at different points and so on. And many of the more lucrative things are places where women are not normally found. Again, we notice that the segmentation is legitimized by institutions such as marriage and kinship systems, but also very powerful ideologies. So in some parts of the country, people even believe women are not farmers, even though they are very heavily involved in agricultural labor, but they are not seen as farmers. Again, the organization of households, the separate purses with cooperation between the conjugal unit, women's reproductive burdens, and so on, all have had implications for their outcome. If we look at the Ghana's recent land and agricultural commercialization, I think what's interesting about them is not the size of that acquisition, because we have countries like Madagascar and so on, which show that almost like half the country was taken up by one transaction. Ghana doesn't have those kinds of transactions, but the cumulative effects are no less less important. Secondly, the lands which are being given out are mainly being given out from the customary law system. Whereas in other countries, it's the state which is giving out land. In Ghana, it's the customary authorities which are doing that. And there are three kinds of land acquisitions which are significant. One is mining, and the more recent one is the biofuels and food. And last but not least, is the oil and gas in the western region. As you know, oil and gas is offshore, but it has triggered a land rush in the western region. So that's a good example of some of the episodes of land acquisition that we've had. And all the research which has taken place so far, and it's a growing body of work, has shown that the most direct beneficiaries of agriculture commercialization projects are young and adult men. And that when project losses are being discussed, they seem to be more direct and visible for men than women because of the land tenure system. So if they are talking about who has lost land, often they are talking about the men who've lost their farming land. They are not talking about their wives who used to use the land when it was fallow and so on and so forth. Women's access to fallow lands in the commons, usually we don't hear much about them, and they have to date not been compensated in compensation programs. Well, another thing we've noticed is that women definitely benefit from the ancillary and corporate social responsibility activities of the agriculture, the commercial agricultural project. Okay. Thank you. So, just to talk about the three types of benefits. One is employment. The biggest employment benefits have come from the plantation and also the outgrower scheme. But we should note that the plantations are capital intensive. So they treat labor as a secondary issue. And they also require, because they are so capital intensive, they require specialized labor. So many times they are hiring from outside the rural communities where they've taken land. And often they are hiring men as skilled labor. Many plantations employ women. And sometimes they even have more women employed than men. But many times the women are casual. There are more women in casual work than in permanent work. And we know that the casual work is more precarious. It has differences in terms and conditions. And there's a clear gender segmentation of work. And somehow, in the system, the jobs that men do are seen as more important than what women do. And some of the jobs are also seen now, the layoffs. So, when we come to the outgrower scheme, the majority of outgrowers are men. Although in a small number of cases, women have been employed as outgrowers or have taken up outgrower responsibility. The important thing about the outgrower schemes are their labor demands on households. Because even if the outgrower is a male, he has to rely on family labor to fulfill his responsibilities. And many of these plantations have very heavy labor demand because it's a new type of cultivation. Sometimes with irrigation, there are strict rules about how many times to water, how to watch the things so that birds don't come. There are all sorts of things. And many outgrowers have complained about those labor demands because these outgrower schemes are small and they cannot replace the livelihoods that they had before. But they take up so much time that you are not able to make up. And basically their returns are not commensurate with the amount of work that they demand. The other loss that a lot of people have suffered is livelihood disruption. And that's mainly with the plantation and also the places where you find nucleus farms of the outgrowers. And there's been a lot of loss of farmland, there's land insecurity. Sometimes the land is cleared and then the plantation is not using that land. And people go back, but they go back on different terms from how it was when they were first using the land. People have to travel longer distances to find land to use. Sometimes they've lost protections under the communal land tenure system. They've lost alternative employment, particularly the ones to do with the commons. The share and the mangoes and so on that people take from the commons. And sometimes there's been a lot of out migration in response to the losses. And all these things have been much more disruptive for women. A particular point has to do with the common property resources. There are two ways in which people use them. Sometimes the commons are given out as part of that. And once they are given out, they are cleared of their vegetative cover, and people no longer have access. Sometimes they are not part of the acquisition, but people are relocated there. The people who lose their land are relocated to the farm. So again, they lose their vegetative cover, which is very key to how they are used in a lot of rural communities. And then they are then replaced by these monocrop systems, because many plantations use monocrop systems. And we know what happens to the monocrop system, the erosion and so on. You are agricultural experts, so I don't have to go. The other thing we find is that people then lose some of their seasonal employment. So the dry season economic activities, which are usually based on the commons, are lost. We have declining wildlife varieties, so a lot of men lose their hunting, the money they make from hunting. People lose their sources of starch and so on. But in general, the studies have shown that the loss of commons is more significant for women, mainly because already they relied more heavily on the commons for their supplementary livelihood. So now I'm coming to my conclusion. In conclusion, I think what the studies are pointing to is that although land and agricultural commercialization has had different business models, I talked about the plantations, the outgrowers, and then the small farms. The gendered outcomes seem to be similar, except in degree. So in many ways, we find that the losses are similar, except that maybe with the plantations, people lose more land than they lose with outgrowers. Secondly, we also realized from the studies that what was happening in the local political economy already influences the gender outcome. So in places where the local economy was already under stress, and where production systems disadvantaged women, and where poverty levels were high, then the gender inequalities became worse. So the ignoring those pre-existing conditions, which a lot of business models have done, means that they are not likely to address gender inequalities. Instead, they make them worse. We also notice that commercialization sometimes disrupts organic processes of local accumulation. So for example, in one study, it was found that there was already local commercialization taking place, and it had a very good linkage with smallholder agriculture in providing tractor services and sometimes providing short-term employment and so on. Once the land was given out for a Jatropha farm, the commercial farmers were displaced, and the Jatropha farmers were not able to establish the same kind of organic linkages that used to be there. Lastly, another thing we should note is that the benefits of commercial agriculture have to be weighed against the losses. And we also have to differentiate between who gained, who lost, and who didn't experience any differences. Because usually they are different. Those who gain are not usually the people who also lost a lot and so on. One of the things we were supposed to gain from commercial agriculture was technology transfer. But again, you find that this has not been possible because certain crops and methods are not easily integrated into the existing production systems that smallholders have. And then I already mentioned the new labor demands, and we really have to worry about that because already women do not have a lot of time. They face a lot of time constraints. And really, I think that the big policy change we need to look at is that commercial farming has to find synergies with smallholder agriculture instead of working in opposition to it or instead of trying to replace it. And that if we want to have this structural transformation we are talking about, then we need to see the agrarian future as an organic process which privileges local gender equitable accumulation so that we can ensure that when the economy changes, it's healthy. It's not that people move into services which make them even poorer and leave agriculture stagnant.